Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is a follow-up to one that I did a few days ago, looking at the indicators in a chart that a person may have been bullied, scapegoated, excluded socially, feeling like an outcast, things like that. And I realized after I did that video that I left out some things I wanted to say. You can look at so many different factors in a chart that might suggest that. But I really want to make it clear that the point of all of this isn't to say, oh, yeah, you are or were some sort of outcast and you should feel sorry for yourself. Because we have to look at things at the macro level. And that means that it's the bigger picture. Why is this happening? Is it happening because a person is bad and that they deserve to be treated that way? So if we even see it as karmic in some way, that means it's some kind of punishment for past life misbehavior. I do feel that there is a karmic connection to all of these situations that occur, but even with karma, it's more of a way to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And they happen to be your shoes because you can only really experience this life, uh, you know, at one time, although maybe some people experience parallel lives at the same time. I don't know. But I should say that we are experiencing this life, and it allows us to understand how other people's behavior impacts how we feel. And that gives us information. And that's what I feel like these circumstances are all about, is more and more information. And so taking away that component of being the one that seems to get the brunt of the abuse or the scorn, whatever you want to call it, I feel that it's very helpful to not emphasize that. But it certainly is fascinating if you notice a pattern. If you are, you go into a social situation and it seems like everybody starts talking to everyone else and you're standing there. I've had these experiences. Can you tell that I've had these experiences? As I stated in the first video, I have some things that in my 11th house, Chiron and Saturn in Pisces, no less, that indicated that for me, as well as maybe other things that don't directly relate to being excluded or being bullied, that still contributed to it in one way or the other. But I wanted to look at some other things that I think will be very interesting to some of you and expand upon what I said in the first video. One of them is the first house. I'm one of those people where if I make a video, I forget what I said sometimes. So I think I touched upon the first house, but I really didn't talk about other factors. And one of them was Chiron in the first. So the first house is a house of the self. It's a house of appearance. And this can indicate being bullied because you look different in some way. And boy, that can run the gamut. It can be being the only person or one of the only few persons of a certain race where you're like, or ethnicity, I normally would say race because that's something that's very noticeable. And you're one of the few people of that race in your school, for instance, and you get picked on for that. It doesn't matter what race you are. It can happen I'll just say ethnicity too, because, someone who is an outsider, feeling that outsider status. Yeah, I should use the word outsider too. Um, Being somebody who just carries themselves in a different way, being or has a different image, because the first house can be the way that you look physically, your physical body, but also the way that you choose to express yourself. So, if you dress in a certain way, like when I was in high school, it was right at the beginning of when people were being punk, so people were starting to dye their hair blue and have like these crazy, well, I'm caught. See, I'm sounding conservative, right? But having wild hairstyles, like that person from Flock of Seagulls. I remember when somebody in my school had that, and I was like, "Whoa, how did they do that with their hair?" Or mohawks. That was a big one, mohawks, and that was actually, some of it was from Rocky Horror Picture Show, which I found out was what came out in the 70s. Um, and they were wearing face makeup and all of this that was like white pancake makeup, and really just very theatrical, but also very different, very strange to other people. Now, a lot of those people were probably artists, because, probably very creative. And that's why they were attracted to that kind of a look too. And artistic people tend to stand out from the crowd. So they tend to wear things that are different. And this can just be anything. It could be dressing like a hippie when everybody's preppy and not seeming to follow trends, or dressing nerdy when everybody's dressing very bohemian. You know? So if you're a child of the 60s and you were dressing very straight and everybody was dressing more wildly, that could be it too. So you could be a conservative in a very liberal area and you would be a rebel. But we're talking here about physical appearance and how you look and how other people perceive you. And I think things have changed a lot since I was growing up, because there just has been so much emphasis on not bullying people, but also society has become much more open-minded as a whole. So these kinds of things are not going to be as big a deal, but they still can happen. And I live in the United States. There are some countries that are much more conservative. Of course, in the United States, there are conservative regions where people are more conventional. But even in the United States, the awareness of, not mocking others can take place. But again, there are some things that are deemed acceptable to mock. If the consensus of the general consensus is, oh yeah, somebody shouldn't wear that, then they can still be mocked. But in other countries, it could be much more pervasive and make it more oppressive for people who want to be their own person. And it just is not deemed acceptable. So, and I know that there are people from all over the world who might be listening to this. So you may have really suffered because you don't want to dress like other people, or just the way that you look. And I want to get back to that because, you have men who may be more effeminate, or women who may be more masculine. When I was young, I was like a tomboy. Um, and I'm gonna do a separate video on like situations where people feel bad about how they look. I forgot how I'm going to call it. where there's a distortion in how they look, body dysmorphia, feeling ugly when you're not ugly, or just, I can't remember exactly how I'm going to do that, about appearance, like eating disorders and things like that, because I think that's a whole separate thing. That's coming from within yourself. I'm talking about how other people react in this video. And so sometimes when somebody doesn't fit a mold, when a man looks a certain way and you don't, or I should say a male, because it could be a younger, like a boy or a young male, doesn't look how the stereotypical male does look, or a woman or girl doesn't look that way, female, then they can be judged for that and treated accordingly. And so in the first house, all of those things, disabilities, physical disabilities, if somebody has, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of like actual disabilities where this would show up big time. I was going to say like a cleft palate, but I think those get fixed pretty early on. Some kind of like disfigurement that may come from birth, or it may come from some kind of an accident, and the person looks different physically than others, and they feel very self-conscious, or other people make them feel self-conscious. Weight problems, I don't know. Just there's so many things that it could be. And so they feel this sense of being freaks, being different, and being teased because of it, being excluded socially because of it. And how does that make that person feel? Well, when they get old enough, if this starts in childhood, they're likely going to be very introverted, but not just like a typical introvert who likes to be alone, insecure, self-conscious, and that just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or you could say a vicious cycle, because the more self-conscious you are, the less likely you are to engage socially, right? You're going to probably isolate yourself just because it's so awkward to be around other people. And you might even have social anxiety and things like that. So yeah, I'm going to be doing something on that as well, on social anxiety, or just anxiety as a whole. I'm going to be doing separate videos on those, because those are very interesting things. And I think there are certain things in the chart that can indicate those kinds of situations. But so that's the first house. And being the house of the self too is like, if you want to be something and that's not acceptable, of course you could say something like being gay, but also if you want to be an artist and your parents push you into sports and you don't want to be in sports, and so it's like you want to just be at home, and it's like your very basic identity is rejected. That to me, with Chiron in the first house, is really, really difficult, because it's kind of like how you feel is your essence. And it's really not, because it's just really based on this lifetime, although you may have had other lifetimes where you were an artist as well, and especially somebody who's a prodigy, that you can see that they have past lifetimes, like a musical prodigy. They just sit down and they're able to understand music inherently. They probably have past lifetimes like that, but it still is you feel it's like your essence, at least in this lifetime. And and that's part of your image too, because it's not just your image, it's your identity. That's what the first house is. So it's how you see yourself. And when somebody doesn't accept that, then it's like they're rejecting your whole sense of being. But again, because it's not your true self, you don't have to tell that story to yourself that I am just completely rejected for who I am, but you can say they don't understand who I am. And that just that shifts the energy completely, because you don't buy into it. You're just like, that's their problem. It's not my problem. That's their confusion. So that kind of thing. And yeah, and gender, when I said confusion, gender confusion, I'm going to be doing one on body dysmorphia and including trans people in that. But this is another example of that, when somebody wants to, who's biologically one gender and they want to present as another gender and other people don't accept that, or there are just some kind of problems with that. That's another example besides being gay, but that's it's not the same thing, obviously, but in that same category. But I'm going to do separate videos on the coming from that own person's point of view and astrological influences. Okay, so that's one house. And then the other house that I was thinking about is the sixth house, because this is the house of work and also the workplace. Health too, but I'm talking about how it would pertain to this. And I have Neptune in this house, and I feel like there are planets like Neptune, and Pluto is another one that can cause kinds of issues with bullying, because Neptune is the ruler of Pisces, so that same situation of being put down, bullied, and also with Pluto, there can be people that are, in the backdrop who are doing something behind your back. Maybe they are kind of against you in some way. And I'm talking about, like, usually it's like coworkers, but of course, the boss. With the boss, I would also say the 10th house. So I'm going to include both of those since they involve the career and the work. That these are areas that this can manifest. And so with Neptune, it can just be this situation of being the scapegoat. I remember I was working one place, and within 3 weeks, and this was like a retail environment. It was a health food store. And within a few weeks, I was written up by my manager for something I didn't do. And I refused to admit that I did it because I didn't do it. And she wrote me up for that. And she said that I did it. And just being accused of something I didn't do, that's like, can you imagine? And even and other things too, like with my particular case, having customers complain to the corporate headquarters about me, being misunderstood, as to my intentions, and being excluded from certain things, like, a wedding that was supposed to be, that was, of somebody who had worked there, the assistant manager or something, that was a long time ago. But the point is, and there was a reason for that as well, because they needed somebody in the store. But the point is that the person always feels excluded. They feel like they're picked on. They feel like they're scapegoated. All the problems are that person's fault. And even if the person does something that is a mistake, they make a big deal out of it. I was accused of, the cash register being short, and it must have been me that I can't handle cash. And then, oh wow, other people had the same problem. It wasn't just me. It's just, how it happens. These were the days before everybody used debit cards constantly. More people used to use cash. Believe me, it's a lot better now than it was then, because it's so easy to have shortages like that. That's just how it goes. So anyway, Pluto, if you have this, it can be power plays in the workplace. And I do think that when you have Pluto in a particular house, you have to check your own energy too. Because Pluto in the sixth house can indicate somebody who is looking to get into a position of power. So if they are a lowly peon and they have coworkers, they may try to outshine the coworkers to ascend the rungs of the ladder of success to power. And that can create negative feelings with the other people, and they can then start to leave that person out of their discussions because they don't trust that person. So, that's another aspect of this, is that sometimes the person is their own worst enemy in certain circumstances. And they may have, I really believe that people who are power seeking come from abuse because they're looking to feel more in control because they were abused, So it makes sense. But it still is something that can create animosity and distrust, and other people can start to avoid confiding in you, and then they're talking amongst themselves, and they may create this kind of a situation where you are left out. So, but that doesn't mean that that's true 100% of the time. There might be times when you are clearly, whenever you go into a workplace, if you have Pluto here, people are uncomfortable because you have a powerful presence, but they are trying to keep you down because maybe they're not seeking excellence. Maybe they're just trying to mail it in. With the 10th house, if you have Mars here, you may clash with authority figures. Perhaps they are like a kind of a substitute father figure, and they are trying to bully you, trying to be very aggressive towards you. But again, just like I said before, it's a two-way street. Maybe if the person grew up with this in their family of origin, they can transfer that to the boss. And so they might be acting rebellious themselves towards anybody who's an authority figure. So I do believe that sometimes, because I'm even thinking about my own situation, I don't have this position, but just in general, is that even if you have been bullied or abused growing up, power abuse, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't mean that you're just going to be like the classic victim. You might be quite rebellious in some way yourself because of that. And so you may give off this aura of like being quite, I don't know if I'd say difficult, but you know what I mean, hard to manage. And this is, that's the unfortunate thing of having a parent who's an authoritarian type of parent, because it's natural for children to want to individuate, to be different, to be their own person. That's part of the maturation process, and no parent should ever try to make their child feel guilty because they want to kind of break free from that mold. They should encourage their child's independence. And some parents have the ability to do that. And guess what? They produce well-balanced children. But those parents who are insecure and they want to control their child and they feel threatened by their child's independence, try to keep them down by putting them down, making them feel incompetent and like they can't make it on their own, they don't have talents. And those types of people produce children who end up overdoing it when it comes to trying to be their own person in the form of being rebellious. And that creates a lot of negative pushback sometimes with other people who are like, okay, why is this person so uncooperative or what have you? So, so I don't want to make it seem like it's a one-way street, because sometimes you're going to do things, you might do something that increases the likelihood that you're going to experience negative reactions from other people. I'm not saying 100%. Even people who are victims and act like victims, that is not going to go over well either. I was in like a Facebook group, or I have been in a Facebook group for the past few months that has to do with being an entrepreneur. And but also spiritual. And there was a person that came into the group who really displayed themselves as the victim and said, this horrible abuse that they had suffered at the hands of a caretaker growing up. And yet this person is really identified as being a victim. They were very identified this way. And so finally, I was one of the people, but so did somebody else. Like, you know what? You're being manipulative. You're trying to gain sympathy, but you're not trying to better yourself. You want to stay stuck in the victim mentality. So that can definitely happen. And that's going to repel other people from you if you are like that. So you're not aggressive. It's not like you're being mean to anybody. It's really what being a covert narcissist is. It's the person who draws attention to themselves because of their past abuse and their victim status. And so they're always talking about all the things that were done to them, but they aren't willing to just kind of like listen to other people. They're not interested really in other people. They're very self-absorbed. So that's why they're a narcissist. They're not really interested in moving on with their life. They're just like, want to be that victim, even though they don't have that victimizer in their life even sometimes. That person who I'm talking about, they said that their abuser had died, but they still are in that victim mentality. And that's going to turn people off because it's a negative vibe. It's one thing to talk about your abuse and talk about it in the past tense and ask for help. But when you're just constantly trying to manipulate people into feeling sorry for you, that's not going to get you very far. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that it's a two-way street. And that can, that abuse can actually cause the person to create a lot of isolation for them because they can't transcend it. They can't get past it. And they identify too much with it. So anyway, I wanted to also talk about the fourth house of home and family. The heavies of the fourth house can be Pluto and Mars. So that can mean having an even domestic violence with Mars, or with Pluto too, it could be, but also having a very controlling parent. Usually the fourth house is the mother, but if the father is if there's Mars in the fourth house, maybe the father is in the military and he's running the house like a military operation, and there's just like all these rules and like very regimented and things like that. And with Neptune, there can be skeletons in the closet, which can indicate abuse, but you might be the like person who is the keeper of secrets. There can be all kinds of abuse with these situations. The mother can be mentally ill with Neptune in the fourth, or a drug addict, an alcoholic, and that in itself, that is the alcoholic system. And when I say alcoholic, I'm talking about the addicted, dysfunctional system, to have the scapegoat, to have the person who is the victim of the household. And so, yeah, with Neptune in the fourth, you might be that person. But again, that is not who you are. That's what they have made you to be. I saw a meme, and it was kind of what I said in my first video. I wish I could remember it. But it was something like the one who is the truth teller is the one who is the victim or the scapegoat. Just something like that. Or no, they said something like the one who is the truth, the one who is the scapegoat is the most awakened one. So they're talking about the spiritually awakened one. So it's like, yeah, I think that as well. That if you are in this family structure and you can see that it is fucked up and you know it, you can see it, that's because you are transcending just the material level. You're seeing it at the deepest level and seeing that there's something wrong here. Even from an early age, you may see this is not how parents should act. And if you dare to say anything about that, they're going to punish you for that, because you're not supposed to see behind the curtain. And that's really what seeing the fallibility of adults is, seeing behind the curtain. Because adults that are healthy, they can apologize to their children. They don't have to make themselves out to be gods. It's the adults who are very insecure and don't know themselves enough to feel safe enough to admit to children their vulnerability, their own imperfections. And that's just in general with people, is that the more that you can just admit, yeah, I made a mistake, that just shows you how comfortable somebody is with being human. When I was working with other people, it freaked me out, like how people had, felt like they had to cover their asses if they made a mistake. And it's like they have to make some excuse and blah, blah, blah. And I would just say, oh, yeah, I screwed up there. Sorry. And I'm not saying, oh, wow, I'm so great and everything. But I'm just saying, I don't think it's such a big deal to be able to have that humility and to say, yeah, I made a mistake. It's like, and maybe that is because of the deep fear of being thought of as incompetent or something. Maybe that's because they really feel like they have to be that way. Usually the people that get picked on are very authentic. And I think that people with autism, like Asperger's, who are highly functioning, they tend to be very unfiltered. They don't have this kind of artifice. And so they might get picked on too, because they don't know how to play that social game. And that causes them to stand out from others. But really, there's this quote from the philosopher Krishnamurti saying that it's no measure of the of somebody's well-being or health to fit into a sick society. I'm kind of mangling it, but that kind of thing. And that, maybe I'll put the correct quote under my video because it is such a great one. Just because you fit into this society doesn't mean that you are, well. As a matter of fact, it probably means something's wrong if you're fitting in really nicely to the society. So anyway, I think that the fourth house, that can really show up with Neptune of being the scapegoat and being, like I said, the keeper of secrets. This can be skeletons in the closet. Same with the 12th house, where Pluto can indicate very deeply buried trauma. But we're talking about something that is ongoing, maybe, or there's like a pattern. Did I talk about the 12th house? I believe I did. So I'm not going to go too much into that, but definitely that karmic influence as well with the 12th house. That if people have like a stellium, at least 3 planets in the 12th, they may have this pronounced unfinished business karmically that they have to clear out in some way, where there's just some obvious karmic debts. I don't really like to talk in those terms because I think that it's ultimately about the wheel of karma is one's understanding of life and its purpose. When a person's just running on automatic, they're going to me, they're just going to keep creating these situations that play out. But when you say to yourself, I don't want to keep creating more and more of these situations, to me, it's about creating more and more karma. But karma means action, doesn't mean punishment. But even action itself, even if it's of a positive quality, it can sometimes feel like you're being, you're on this hook and you want to get unhooked. So, like, in other words, you may have a friend that you really think is a nice person, and you call them and then they call you, but they expect you to call them back. It's like back and forth, like playing a game of tennis. And you're like, you know what? I don't want anybody to have expectations that I'm going to call them, so I'm not going to call them. But it doesn't mean that you're punishing them. It just means that you want your freedom. Well, if we want our freedom from the cycle of birth and death, then we have to understand, that the energy that we put into something is going to keep us on that hook. So do we want to keep investing energy in something? And so with the 12th house, maybe certain things that are patterns have to be broken so that you can truly move forward, because the first house is all about those new cycles. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Oh yeah, and another thing too is that there are open enemies and there are hidden enemies. And so the 7th house are open enemies. And so, I mean, I really didn't even think about exploring this, but maybe if you have Pluto there, or I don't know, maybe Neptune. I would have to look more into that. Saturn. Maybe there are people who just are, and it could even be karmic, maybe with Saturn, where they just seem to try to keep you down, because the 7th house it's the house of committed partnership, but it's also the house of publicity, public relations. So with the 7th, and even the 10th house too, maybe, Saturn or Pluto or something like that, where there are people who want to try to keep you from having a good reputation. And in the 12th house, it's, like sabotaging. The 12th house, this would come behind the scenes. So frenemies or anybody, it could even maybe be family members. I don't like to talk about that because it sounds like really paranoid. I don't want to make people paranoid, but you might know, like, if you feel like there are certain people that are always plotting to keep you down in some way, that could be coming from a very covert type of place, like it's not really open. But with the 7th house and the 10th house, these could be more obvious. The 10th house, too, it might be more authority figures. So if you're the kind of person who tends to draw attention from the police or anything like that, and it's very interesting because being harassed by the police has happened to people not just recently. This I was reading a book by Robbie Krieger, he still is a guitarist, but he was with the Doors. He was a guitarist for the Doors. And he came from an affluent environment. And he would get, he got arrested, I think multiple times, because he had longer hair. He had like really wild, crazy, curly hair. But he was, kind of that bohemian type. And this was in the late 50s. And that was something that even affluent white kids could get bullied by the police, and I'm not trying to put down the police, by the way, but this is something that was systemic, I think, because they suspected them of being up to no good. And it's, again, that idea of you are not, you look funny, you look like you're trouble, and I'm going to, harass you, or I'm going to, I think you did that crime because you happen to be in this area and you look weird. So, and I think Janis Joplin, I was looking at something and I think she had a mugshot. Now, I don't know, maybe she was up to something, but this definitely, people have gotten harassed by cops before this era. And so we have to put things in perspective and realize that authority figures, the reason that people rebel against authority figures is because they're trying to keep the status quo going on. And people who are revolutionaries, rebels, weirdos, whatever, are a threat to that. Even if they're not doing anything, any kind of criminal behavior, just their very existence threatens the status quo. Okay? So the trick is to be able to respect these people. You may not agree with them, but being able to respect that they are doing something, and obviously if they're abusing people, you shouldn't respect that, but I'm saying just the title that they hold, because you're not trying to rebel against anyone, you're just trying to be yourself. So, it's like letting go of that anger that you feel because you feel misunderstood. That's like a real sign of maturity, like spiritual maturity, emotional maturity, because you're able to see them as human beings too. This also extends to parents. Even if you feel that you were abused by them, that you were the scapegoat, it doesn't mean that you approve of what they've done. But when you can see them as mere human beings, maybe even fragile human beings, people who have been traumatized themselves, you no longer have that kind of poisonous anger towards them. Maybe you even have pity for them, sympathy. that doesn't mean that in some cases you are going to have anything to do with them, because maybe you can't. It's too toxic. It's too dangerous. But at least you don't have to be angry towards them and then be rebellious against anybody who has that kind of authority over you, because that I'm doing all of these videos to help people to improve their lives, because we tend to be reactive when we have been the victim of abuse. And it's understandable, but it isn't helpful ultimately. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.